Hey everyone, today I'm at the Confederate Home of Missouri in Higginsville, and right over there is a chapel. Now it's locked and we can't go in there, but we are going to probably try to peek in the windows and I can show you a little bit. It's a beautiful looking little chapel. But just to the side of that are all these graves right here. These are Confederate graves. And we're going to go in there and we're going to discuss one of them that's of major importance, but it's also very odd. As you make your way to the entrance, there's several pieces of information that you can read about, and they have this old reproduction of a postcard blown up, and you can see these old buildings right there. Those buildings still remain. They're right over that way. At one time it looks like there were probably gates as you enter this cemetery, and I'm saying that just because you can see some brackets there. And like I said, this is a Confederate cemetery, so these are all Confederate veterans. And there's several things that you can read about here. And I won't go into that, but I will show you this picture that was of the day of the dedication to this memorial, which was in 1906. And that memorial is right there. This memorial was made possible by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And that is just about my eye level right there. You can see this lion here. And so this is a rather large memorial here, but it is certainly eye-catching, and it just kind of stands in the middle because you have Confederate graves on this side, and then on the other side of this there are some more. So there is the chapel. And the person that we're looking for is right back in that far corner there. So this is the person that we've made the trek here to see, and it's William Quantrill. You may have heard about him, but he formed a band of rebels or a band of guerrilla fighters called the Quantrill Raiders. There were quite a few of these men underneath him. Some of the more famous that you might have heard about are Cole Younger and Frank James. They were some of the initial ones that he had. Cole Younger was almost like his right-hand man. There are some people that debate on whether or not that these Quantrill Raiders were even Confederate veterans. Regardless, they did fight against the North. They had some different tactics of fighting. The Union soldiers referred to them as bushwhackers. Some of the things that they did were a little bit controversial. Now it depends on which side of the story you identify with as to what you may think about Quantrill. Some say that he did the right thing and that he was a hero. Others on the Confederate side think that these people were nothing but terrorists. And then Northerners on the Union side also say that he was a terrorist. I'm definitely not here to debate on whether he was or wasn't. I'm just simply trying to tell some history because he has an interesting story. William was from Dover, Ohio. He was a well-educated man. He was actually a teacher, and he came to Lawrence, Kansas. There he began teaching, but he always felt like he wasn't respected. That he also thought that the job didn't pay like he needed it to make a living. Really, it's kind of the same sort of things that you hear teachers talk about today. So eventually he came over to the Missouri area where he got a commission in the Confederate States Army. But he soon formed his own unit, which consisted of these raiders. They really operated separately from the Confederates, but they did recognize them as being on their side. Definitely the Union thought of them as being Confederates, but the Union also thought of them as terrorists. Eventually, William Quantrill and his raiders ended up going back into Kansas where he taught, and they did a raid there where they did all sorts of pillaging and things like that. There were a lot of raiders that participated in this raid, and they killed about 150 people. They set fire to a lot of the buildings as well as caused a lot of destruction. Basically, they just killed a lot of people, in which some say for no reason at all. Really, it got a little out of control, and it was something that William couldn't handle. But when the Civil War was over, he knew he couldn't stay in the area because there were people trying to hunt him down. They wanted to hold him responsible for all the things that he had done. But he had the idea of going back east. The hopes of that was to blend in with the Confederates there and possibly change his name. But he ended up in Louisville, Kentucky, in that area where some bounty hunters finally caught up with him. They shot him and hit him right in the backbone, which paralyzed him from the waist down. At that point, he went into a Catholic hospital, and he remained there for about a month until he passed away. But while he was at that hospital, he made arrangements to have a burial plot in the St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery, which was there in Kentucky. The priest that was there had him buried but left it unmarked, and the reason why he did that is he feared that the body would be stolen or that the marker would be taken or something like that. So they did know where he was, but he was just in an unmarked grave. So since he was from Dover, Ohio, like I mentioned earlier, his mother had expressed interest in getting his body back to Dover. She wanted his body to be buried where he was from. The concern with that, though, was that he was a person who wasn't really liked by the Northerners and the Union people, and that if he went there, his grave would be destroyed, vandalized, or dug up, something like that. His mother sent one of the childhood friends that William had, and his name was Scott. Now, he was sent to try to negotiate something with the cemetery, but that didn't ever happen. So he ended up digging up the body anyways. And Scott discovered that most of the bones had disintegrated. The mother identified the bones by a chipped tooth that was in the skull, and that chipped tooth supposedly was there since childhood. And Scott went ahead and promised to transfer the bones, but there are stories that these bones were never really given to her, or if they were, that they were some sort of animal bones. Regardless, those bones were taken and buried in the cemetery in Dover, Ohio. The contents of those bones, or what was there, were never fully examined. Scott tried unsuccessfully, though, with the bones that he kept to sell them to collectors. After his death in 1902, his son gave Quantrill's skull to a boys' club that later became a fraternity. That fraternity used the skull in its rituals until 1942 when it disbanded. The skull was eventually donated to the Dover Historical Society in 1972. The widow of Scott's son sold the remaining bones to a collector who became secretary of the Kansas State Historical Society. In 1992, they gave one of Quantrill's arms and a shin bone to the Missouri Division of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans. They buried those bones here in this cemetery, and the skull was buried in Dover in a fiberglass children's coffin. But before it went in the ground, they made a cast of that skull, and it was displayed in the Historical Society for a while. But during the hot days of the summer, the water would beat up on the surface, making it look like it was alive and sweating. So the head was removed to a refrigerator, and supposedly it's shown on request to this day. Don't know if that's true though. There have been several attempts to reunite all the bones in this cemetery, but they have failed. So the remains were wrapped in plastic and placed in a red beverage cooler and laid to rest inside a replica 19th century oak coffin draped in a Confederate flag. About 300 people attended the burial on October 24th, 1992. The cooler was glued shut, the coffin lid was nailed down, and the burial happened underneath a layer of concrete to protect it from robbers. 6 days later, the skull was buried in Dover, Ohio. Now, I'm not here to debate anything on Quantrill. I know he was a controversial man. I'm just simply trying to tell the story of what happened to him with his burial and how he has 3 different graves. He is a controversial man, but his burial is very controversial in itself. I'm not aware of another person, no matter who they are, that has bones in 3 different graves, 3 different burial areas, 3 different markers. So to me, that's really fascinating. And he's buried here in this cemetery for you to come see in Missouri. But if you wanted to, you can see the other 2 graves as well. Now, I hope to see those graves someday and just kind of make a complete story on this. But in the meantime, you can check him out here. Some of these markers in here are really worn and they're getting hard to read. They're not too legible anymore. Like I said, William Quantrill is most certainly one of the last ones to be laid to rest in here. This one says 1904. This one right here is 1905. Here's a colonel that was also a Mason, 1926. Last Board of Confederate Trustees member. And this is just a date where they erected this cemetery, 1892. And it looks like there was supposed to be something right up here. Maybe a cross, who knows? But it's not there anymore. This one's pretty neat. 1909. The rest of them back there, for the most part, are just kind of more slanted flat markers. But there's a few of them up here that are pretty neat to see. This says one of Shelby's men right there. Just wanted to show you a few of these. '13, Texas Cavalry. You can see this chapel here. I was hoping it would be unlocked so I could take you inside, but sadly it has a padlock on it. Still think it's really pretty though. This is the inside of the chapel here. And there's kind of those old school pews that have those metal stands. And we can get a pretty good view of that stained glass window there. I do think that these are the original windows here for the most part around this chapel. They have the little imperfections. I don't know if it's really showing, but as I move around, it's kind of wavy in those trees. Now there are a couple windows where you can tell that they're more modern, but it's a really neat chapel. Reflection on the window, but it's the best view we can get considering that they have this all locked up. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little tour of this Confederate cemetery in Missouri and enjoyed the little story and the controversy and the strangeness of Quantrill having 3 graves. If you like these kinds of stories or these tales or these videos, please hit subscribe and the like button. It'll help out a lot. Thank you. We'll see you guys next time.